Hola y bienvenido a mi canal. Today I would like to talk about the topic of learning languages. When you hit a certain age, are you too old to learn a language? Are you able to learn a language better when you're younger? Typically, people say that teenagers or kids even are way better at learning languages than adults. So I want to talk about this entire topic in today's video, and also I'd like to hear your guys' opinions and whatever in the comment section down below. So please let me know your opinions as well down below in the comment section. I'd love to read all of your guys' thoughts and ideas and opinions on this topic. When you're a kid, it seems to be that you are able to pick up a language really well. Typically, kids who grow up in a bilingual household, for example, are able to learn both languages almost seamlessly without really any effort. And it even happens to monolingual kids as well, like myself, who grew up only speaking English. Like, it seemed to me like it just came naturally, but what it actually was years and years and years worth of listening and attempting to speak and getting it wrong and being corrected and listening more, and eventually over years worth of practice I got to a point of where I just knew how to speak the language. I don't know the exact ages, but like typically kids don't speak until like age 3 or maybe 4, and so already there's 4 years worth of just pure listening every single day for 12, 13, 14, however many hours worth of listening to their parents and their family members just in that language. And so the entire time that kid is like a sponge absorbing that language and essentially getting a grasp of the language and maybe how to speak it, and eventually they get the confidence to try and speak something in that language. Normally it's just a simple word like mama or papa, but eventually it will start becoming more. They'll start to try and say sentences, for example, and when they try and piece together words, they'll get things wrong. And even as they grow up to be a little bit older, into a toddler or a young kid, for example, a kid of the age of 7 or 8 years old will still get certain things wrong, but you correct them, and then over time, they will eventually just understand the corrections and they will be able to speak with proper grammar. For example, if the kid of around 7 years old would like to say, I saw a dog, they might say something like, oh, I seed a dog. And then you say, I saw a dog. And then it's that kind of correction that they will then take in, and then maybe they'll make that mistake again, and then you correct them again, and then it's a very repetitive thing until eventually that kid will say, I saw a dog. And you're like, well done. And then you know, whatever, you congratulate them and you make them feel like that was worth something and it was a big achievement. And so if a kid at 7 or 8 years old has that kind of command in the language after years and years worth of listening, I don't think that's the most effective way of learning a language. And in fact, that kid has spent 8 years of just listening and then a few years of attempting to speak and getting it wrong and still getting things wrong. And they're just doing what kids do. They're making mistakes, but they're learning from their mistakes and they carry on, and over time they evolve and get better. One other thing I'd like to note about kids and learning languages before we move on is that if you was to ask a kid, define for you what a plural is, they might not understand what you're saying. They might not know what the definition of a plural is, or really have never heard of the word plural before. But if you was to say to them, this is one dog, these are two, it's possible they'll say dogs, as a simple example. So they're able to use the function of a plural within day-to-day usage, but they might not be able to explain to you what a plural is. So this is also another important thing when it comes to learning a language. People think you have to study grammar books intensely and basically understand the grammar before you can even speak. Completely not the case. And in fact, a lot of the time, a lot of polyglots and people who learn languages, they tend to try and avoid like intense grammar studies because they know that this isn't the best use of their time, and instead they get into a language and they read and they listen and they watch TV and all of this other stuff in order to pick up the language, get vocabulary, and then they'll just make mistakes, and then later on down the line they may look up grammar rules and things like that. And so the same way as when you're a kid and you're growing up and you're speaking the language and listening and making mistakes and you're being corrected, you probably won't understand most grammar points, for example, a plural as a simple situation, until you're about age 12, maybe age 13, when you're in school in your English lessons and they start teaching you about things of that nature, of grammar and that kind of thing. And so if you're 12 years down the line, like, learning this language, being absorbed in this language, and now you're finding out about plurals and other grammar things that are probably a bit more complicated than plurals, then that tells us that we don't need to know the names of things in grammar in order to understand them, and we don't need to understand the concept of certain things in grammar. we will pick up patterns and we will be able to, put them in day-to-day use with enough practice and with enough exposure. The other benefit with this, obviously, is that at the age of 12, when these kids are learning these kind of grammar points, they'll say, all right, so a plural, for those of you who don't know what it basically is when you have more than one thing and you typically add an S or ES at the end of words. Here's an example: dog, dogs, or whatever other word you want to use there. And with 12 years worth of experience, these kids are going to very quickly understand a plural because they have so many different reference points to what a plural may be. They've maybe used it many times before and they now understand what it is. Whereas if you try to teach them day one, they ain't gonna understand. And it's the same for an adult when you're learning grammar in your target language. Day one, you try and learn anything in grammar, ain't gonna work. When you compare this to an adult, adults have already at least one language, quite typically, their mother tongue, that they can base off, when it comes to learning another language. For me, it's English. And so when I'm learning another language, I will use English as my sort of anchor point to then learn this other language. I will learn, for example, in Spanish, the word casa, and I go, what is casa? And then I go into English and I search it up on Google Translate or whatever I need to do. Oh, it means house. Okay. Oh, perro. What does perro mean? And it's dog. And, you get the idea. And so you use English to already have a basis, and then you basically translate into your target language. As an adult, if you focus after a couple of hours, you can start to say simple words and phrases and that kind of thing in your target language, which is something that a kid takes many years to be able to do. A kid cannot say on day one, hello, how are you, yes, no, where's the bathroom, etc. Whereas adults typically are able to, especially if you're already like a seasoned language learner, you've already done it once or twice, maybe you've got an idea of how languages work, then adults are able to learn quicker in that sense. Adults also have the ability to read from the get-go if they want to, whether they understand or they don't understand. At the beginning, it's quite irrelevant. You start to get an idea for what the language looks like. And if you're listening, you get an idea for how it sounds, especially if you're reading a language which is like similar to your native language, for example, Spanish to English. Then when you read in Spanish, you can get an idea of how words sound anyway. So you can read and already pick up on vocabulary again, almost immediately from the get-go. Whereas kids, they don't know how to read. They have to spend many years developing the skill of reading alongside developing the skill of understanding their first language. There's a lot for them to do. There are all sorts of other things that adults potentially have when it comes to having the upper hand on kids, but I think you get the idea. Obviously, adults already have a basis. They already have their first language set in stone, and they can use this as an anchor point to then learn their second or third or fourth language. Now, this also is somewhat of a distraction, I guess, for them. It's a blessing and a curse, because essentially, when you're learning another language, you probably focus too much on your native language. And so, for example, I'm learning Spanish. Oh, but I'm thinking too much in English and I'm not thinking enough in Spanish. And so the Spanish have a different way of phrasing things. And, in English, I'm thinking differently, and so word order is different in Spanish, and things can get confusing. And so as an adult, you have to relearn basically how to organize sentences in quite a lot of different languages, and it's things like this that will take a bit longer to learn, but eventually you'll get there if you do enough studying and spend enough time in that language. Because you have spent however many years up until this point just speaking your own mother tongue, it's difficult for you to then try and switch things around and think in a different way. But again, it's something that's like a skill that you need to build up. Adults quite typically say that, they're too old and so their brain doesn't work as well. Or, there's something in there where like a young kid just has like a better brain because it's like working better and it's like evolving still. And so because of that, it's still growing. There's like something there that like gives them more ability to learn a language. I don't think this is really true. There are certain people, for example, Steve Kaufman, who will basically go against this idea because Steve Kaufman's a guy who's like 75 or in that age range, and he's learned, I think, about 15 languages from the age of 60 to 75. So in the last 15 years, he's learned, all of these different languages. Or maybe it's a little bit less, maybe it's like 10 languages. I don't know the exact number. And also he learned like a couple languages between the ages of like 0 and 60. And so he learned, I don't know, like 4 or 5 maybe, up until the age of 60. And then he learned the rest of his languages after the age of 60. And obviously, if you're too old to learn a language, then Steve Kaufman wouldn't be able to learn these languages after a certain age. But he's proven time and time again that language learning isn't about age, but instead it's about other factors in your life, motivation, and the ability to notice, as he always mentions as well. So I don't think it's down to age when it comes to learning a language. I think it is way more to do with motivation, way more to do with, as Steve says again, the ability to notice. And he also says the attitude of the learner also is one of the factors as well that determines whether you are going to learn the language quicker or slower than others as well. And so there's probably other things that go into language learning as well, but they're like 3 points that Steve Kaufman always mentions in his videos. And I think they're very true and they're worth reiterating in this video as well, because I think rather than like thinking, oh, I'm too old to learn a language, I can't learn a language because of these factors, it's probably due to other things in your life, again, as I say, motivation. I think motivation's a really big one, really key one. Sometimes my motivation is a lot lower than others, and so I understand when your motivation's low, you don't really feel like studying the languages. I would like to say one more thing that's just come to my mind when it comes to adults versus kids when it comes to learning languages, and it's that don't forget that kids have all day, every day to do nothing but listening. They literally just sit there, crawl around, they don't worry about anything, and then when someone speaks to them, they're trying to listen, they're trying to understand what's being said, and that's all they do all day, every day for at least 3 to 4 years before they start speaking at least some very simple words. When it comes to adults, almost all of us have adult duties, work, household chores, etc., friends to keep up to date with, and all of these other things that, otherwise you could say would get in the way of your language learning. Whereas for a kid, they don't have any of the stress or worry, they just do their own thing and they're chilling. We basically have a limited amount of time compared to kids. And because of that, again, don't put so much stress on yourself. If, I don't know, for example, sometimes you may be studying a language and you hear a kid who is from the country of the language you're trying to learn, and you hear them and they speak better Spanish, for example, than you can speak, even though they're younger than the amount of years you've been studying the language for. It's because they probably get more hours in on a day-to-day basis. So if you were to look at the amount of hours you spend in your language, you may find that they just put in more hours because as a kid, you're able to rack up 12, 13 hours a day of just listening to your family and whatever else, Also, they sit in front of a TV and they just sit there and watch all day long, just, absorbing the TV. And so there's all of this kind of thing, whereas obviously as an adult, you have to go to work. You have to, make sure you provide for your family and all of the other adult responsibilities that you have. Kids don't have that. And so obviously that is one advantage that kids do have over adults. This video is just off the top of my head, so there's probably things that I've missed out in this video. Please let me know down in the comment section if there are anything else that you would add to this debate or conversation. I'd be interested to see what you guys think, so let me know down in the comment section your thoughts and opinions, etc. Don't forget that I also reply to comments as well, so if you'd like to start up a discussion or give me video ideas, etc., I'd be happy to reply to comments down below as well. With all that out of the way, gracias por mirar, que tengas un buen día y hasta luego.